Hello and welcome to the Championship Talk podcast. I'm your host Paul O'Toole and joined, I think it's that way, is my co-host Thomas Falconer.
Hello! You'd have thought you'd have worked that out by now after
Every time I edit it, and I edit the two video streams together, I always get really annoyed that I've pointed in the wrong direction. But anyway, you're somewhere about there. They can see it anyway. So, we're going to start with an unsavoury subject, but unfortunately it seems to be we're talking about this subject more and more. It's the abuse that players and officials are now suffering due at the hands of Facebook and Twitter, and it's the letter that the EFL and FA and most of the governing bodies have written. It's an open letter written to the CEO of both Facebook and Twitter, demanding that the bodies take action in monitoring and vetting the posts that are posted on their sites. They're saying that both platforms are a breeding ground for a haven for hatred, I think is the word they use. I'll read the letter in more detail. What were your thoughts? Because you've read the letter, what were your thoughts as I get the letter up?
I will let you read the content of the letter. I refer to the conversation I saw on the soccer special on Sky yesterday. It was Paul Merson, Clinton Morrison, and I believe Andy Hinchcliffe were with Julian Warren, Jules Warren, and Paul Merson was very, very passionate about that, and I think he articulated himself very well. I know a lot of people on social media were saying he come across as rather ranty and shouty, but it is a passionate subject. I can't believe still it's 2021 and people find it acceptable to use social media to do this, and it's not just in football, it's in society in general. I mean, you look further back to the case of Caroline Flack and the thing that and the things that happened leading up to her ultimately tragic death, and it's been going on for years in different forms and different mediums. But when people, for the colour of your skin, for your beliefs, for your sexual orientation, and even Mike Dean for making decisions that are perceived to be wrong as well, people feel like they have got the right to go on social media and lambast people based on any of them characteristics and threaten life because people have made bad decisions. It's just ridiculous, and I know you're going to go into more detail in a minute as well. But
yeah, so the writers of the letter are the Premier League chief executive, the CEO of the FA, the CEO of the EFL, the director of the women's professional game, the CEO of the PFA, the chief executive of the LMA, and basically that they're asking for a set of measures for Facebook and Twitter to impose. They're asking for, and these are the key points. They request that Facebook and Twitter messages and posts should be filtered, blocked before being sent or posted if they contain racist or discriminatory material. You should operate a robust, transparent and swift measures to take down abusive material if it does get into circulation. All users should be subject to an improved verification process. Allows accurate identification of the person and the account, and steps should be taken to stop users that have sent abuse from re-registering an account, and platforms should actively assist the investigating authorities in identifying the originators of illegal discriminatory material. So that's what they are asking for. These platforms are anonymous breeding ground for this type of hatred. I think the football authorities are asking for too much. I think one of those measures stops this entirely, and that's if we make this a non-anonymous platform. So I think all they need to do is some sort of verification process, some sort of identification process. Two things that will happen. It will mean that the users are actually the correct age for these platforms, because these platforms have an age restriction, and it's very easy just to type in the wrong date, a date of birth that matches the age you need. Mm-hmm. That will shield this platform from a lot of younger people that don't necessarily know what they're saying, and are probably from backgrounds where perhaps this may be acceptable. They may be from sort of underprivileged backgrounds, and they just get caught along with the flow. The other thing is it would stop. It would mean that if something's reported, the relevant information can be passed to the police. That person can then be prosecuted, and what ultimately it means a permanent ban can happen because there's a correct verification process. I think when you look at how many millions of posts are posted on these platforms, it would be impossible to do the first thing that they're asking for in terms of a filter and block. I think a correct verification process. Now, the Facebook and Twitter are not going to do that because it will limit access to their platforms. It will discourage people from their platforms that are, again, from lower privileged backgrounds that wouldn't have the identification that they would need to have an account on these platforms. So they would lose millions of, if not potentially billions of users almost overnight because people wouldn't have the correct identification to use these platforms. So I don't think they're going to do it, but that would ultimately be the thing that stops this entirely. Because when you look at football stadium, and we've talked about racist behaviour and discriminatory behaviour in football stadiums, it's far less common because it's every part of that football stadium is under cameras. Every part of that football stadium. We talk about Millwall and the fact that they're using ID checks to buy tickets now, etc. And this would ultimately stop this. However, it doesn't solve the problem that there are these people that think this is acceptable.
Yeah, and no offense to you, Paul, I don't buy that it is to do with backgrounds as well, because some of the people, I just think it's ignorance in general. I don't think it matters with the background. I don't think you can link it more that people from so-called who are less privileged backgrounds are more likely to put this material online, because it isn't the case. It can literally be anyone. Facebook and Twitter and all social media and people like that could enact filters and stuff like that, because they do for certain terms on their searches where things are flagged up, and it's just a case of whether it
Actually, you make a good point. They often filter a lot of copyrighted material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they could do it. It is plausible.
No, you are right. If a goal's scored, you tend to see that taken down pretty quickly if it's on a restricted site and things like that. So maybe it is possible. I just think the quickest way to do it is to enact a verification process.
Yeah, and I mean, as a person speaking from experience, I worked in a particular industry a fair few years ago now, more years than I care to admit to, where you could open up an account without any identification whatsoever, and people who were vulnerable and underage, even in some cases, were allowed to go on websites and actually gamble and things like that. I'm not mentioning any particular things, but the checks and the sort of the security processes were not as stringent as they should have been, and there's a lot of cases where that led to that being improved. So I think social media could do that as well, because people who do this are breaking the law and they can't hide behind fake accounts. It's ridiculous how people can have 10, 12 different accounts, and it's like, oh, I've done this on one, so I'll just go to the next one and do it again, then I'll do this and go to the next one again. You can track people with IP addresses as people you can track from IP addresses as well, and things like that. It's just something has got to happen, because there is no way that anyone whatsoever should be picked on for anything that we mentioned before. It is ridiculous at this day and age and it just seems to have snowballed as well. There's been cases, there's always cases in sport, but now they're getting more. It's just getting more and more and more, and it's. Yeah. No, something has got to happen, and got to happen soon, because we can't live in a society where people be scared to leave their house for fear of their life, because someone behind a keyboard has just said, I hate you because of what you've done. That's just.
And I saw a comment that said, Mike Dean and Marcus Rashford just stop using the platform. No, that's not right.
No. They should.
If someone shouted at them in a restaurant or started abusing them in a restaurant, should they leave the restaurant? This is the type of forum that we have to liken it to, and it's not right. It is down to the big tech giants to take more of a stance. I don't think they will. I'll be surprised if they enact any one of these measures, because it will ultimately hit their bottom line. And the thing is something has to change, because there's been reports almost weekly of players being abused, and rightly so. Now the players aren't sharing it, so that they're basically, I think Marcus Rashford took a really good stand by not sharing the post, but just saying, who reported it, and ultimately there needs to be action done and really harsh penalties, legal penalties, for the people that think this is acceptable. However, it could be easily fixed by the big tech giants, but it just highlights how much more there needs to be done in this space, because it's quite scary that we're almost now weekly talking about it, and it's becoming quite depressing, very depressing, because we think we're past we think we've moved on, and it's a reality check that no, we haven't. Absolutely no, we haven't.
No.
We want to move on to our next subject, and that is Sheffield Wednesday. Obviously, currently managerless. However, Sheffield Wednesday owner Mr. Chancery has rejected an offer to buy the club from former advisor Eric Alonso. The Spaniard, who owns management company WBD Sports, is said to be backed by a wealthy Indonesian consortium and offered between 25 and 30 million for a 100% stake in the Hillsborough club. However, Mr. Chancery declined to even enter negotiations. Seems to be he doesn't want to sell, and he wants to push Sheffield Wednesday forward, which isn't a bad thing.
No, I mean, he's obviously...
They've just got to find a manager.
They may not have to look too far, because I think the current incumbent is doing quite well, isn't he? Putting himself out there at least to the end of the season, as we mentioned in the last pod. It shows a commitment as well. Reading some articles on Yorkshire Live where people who are close to the club's inside sources have said that he wouldn't entertain it because it's nowhere near the valuation that he would put on it, and he's not looking to sell anyway. So there's a little bit of stability there, isn't it? It shows he's committed to the cause and not just going to take the first offer that comes, because they find themselves in a little bit of a situation at the minute. They've turned a corner on the pitch at the minute, and long may that continue. Makes them a more appealing prospect to any managers if they're still looking further afield. But Neil Thompson, the current incumbent, is now long odds on to take the job on a permanent basis, although the odds may be skewed, because I believe most of the betting sites say if you've been in charge for 10 games you are deemed as actually being the next permanent successor. So the odds probably get shorter week on week, because he's got more and more games under his belt before they announce a successor. So watch this space as far as it comes with Sheffield Wednesday. But a little bit of stability behind the scenes in that he's not looking to sell as well. I think that's good. That can only be good for the club, and a good sort of, what's I'm looking for, fill-up for the fans at the minute as well. Nice little fill-up and a little confidence boost that things are not quite as bad as they seem at times.
Harry Redknapp's not officially involved with Bournemouth, just wants to help Jonathan Woodgate after chats with the Cherries manager. Harry Redknapp confirmed he will not be joining Bournemouth in an official capacity, but asked if he could help out his former club and interim boss Jonathan Woodgate. I think that's a really good... I mean, Wayne Rooney's being helped by Steve McLaren, and I think there's something in being guided by a manager that's been there, done that, been sacked numerous times, made all the mistakes that a new manager will make. If you're someone who's not ego driven and prepared to take the sage advice of Harry Redknapp, I think that's a really good idea to have him in and about.
Yeah, I think he knows the club well as well, doesn't he, considering he was manager 80s and 90s, wasn't he? Into the 90s, maybe early 90s. Not got the sort of facts and figures in front of me, but I know he's local to the area as well. Is that Gold? Where's that very nice area in the Bournemouth area? Is that Gold? I want to say it's Gold Banks. I can't remember what that's called now. There's a nice area, and I know he's there, isn't he? He's got property there, so he's probably nearby. Nice, he still wants to be involved in the game as well. He's doing his punditry on the Sky sort of specials and whatever. Be interesting to see. I know he had a bit of a quandary because he was meant to be in the studio for a game on Saturday. Actually, they're playing a team quite close to my heart, I believe, on Saturday, and he asked for time off because his horse was running in the big race at Newbury. So it's nice to see he's got fingers in many pies, but that meeting looks like it's going to be abandoned, so he might not be able to watch that, so he can fully focus on the game. But no, it's good. He is a character. He's 72, 73. It's good he still wants to be involved in the game, whether it be an official or unofficial capacity, and he can only help Jonathan Woodgate, he's had a season and a bit in the Championship, isn't he? He's had a time in charge of Middlesbrough, so yeah.
I think just having someone about to make, to help guide you through potentially the mistakes that they made is a good thing. We're going to move on to the EFL statement after a arbitration committee ruled in the PFA's favour regarding the salary cap. An independent arbitrational panel upheld a claim from the Professional Football Association that the EFL was in breach of the constitution of the Professional Football Negotiation and Consultative Committee, introducing a salary cap. In August 2020, following extensive and comprehensive consultation with EFL clubs, Leagues 1 and 2 voted to adopt a new financial controls that replaced the previous salary cost management protocols. The PFA argued that they were not adequately consulted and were not properly considered as part of the process to introduce new rules. As a result, served a notice to claim to this effect. The EFL and PFA then agreed to refer the matter to an arbitration. After hearing submissions from both parties, the independent panel concluded that the EFL was in breach of an agreement as a member of the PFNCC. It looks like they're going to have to go back to the drawing board. The EFL will now discuss this matter of financial controls and implications linked to the outcome of a series of meetings with its members of the club this week. I was on the fence with a salary cap. I wasn't entirely sure. One, I wasn't entirely sure that it was even legal to impose restrictions on trade personally, which ultimately you're posing a restriction of a footballer's contract. So I wasn't even sure that was even going to be possible to happen anyway. But it looks like they've kind of not consulted the PFA at all, which does look bad for the EFL.
Yeah, I can see why they want to do this, especially in these times with COVID and the fans not being in the stadiums and the lack of income in general. I think it was 2.5 million for League 1 clubs and 1.5 million for League 2 clubs. I think I've got that right.
Yep.
I've got my notes in front of me.
And that was an annual salary cap. So.
Yeah, so I can see why they're trying to do that to protect, but obviously there has to be full consultation with every party there. And as you've said, there are different. I don't know where it stands with the rules and regulations now. We're out of the EU, but I'm sure there are different types of freedoms and stuff like that where the clubs think that they may be restricted in their movement and the trade and etc. So yeah, back to the drawing board, and hopefully an agreement can be reached that is good for all parties, really, because I think now more than ever, you look at some of the owners in the National League, for example, going further down, Dover, the chairman is having to put his own money in because he literally said they've run out of money. They've had to apply for a Sport England grant just to keep afloat. So you look at the National League, it's only one level up. The next level up is League 2. So if some National League clubs are starting to struggle, yeah, it's just got to wait and see. It's just it
doesn't bode well.
No, and hopefully the clubs with the grants that are coming down from the Premier League that we talked about in previous podcasts are going to help in that respect. But yeah, we need to see where this pandemic leads in the coming months when it comes to clubs with getting fans back in the stadiums and things like that, because I can see the benefits of having a salary cap, and we've even mentioned it before with even the Championship and the Premier League. But then you're looking at maybe clubs not being able to attract marquee signings, for example, or they have one big name player and the rest may be made up of youth players, etc. So yeah, I think we're a way off coming to an amicable agreement where we can have a fair salary cap at League 1, League 2 level, let alone Championship and Premier League.
I think they should. The problem is because of the way that English football is structured, we could never have a salary cap like the NFL, where they're franchised and their salary cap is based on an annual turnover for the previous season. So their salary cap is directly linked to the income of the entire NFL, not a franchise. So we could never have that because obviously the clubs in the UK are fan owned. In the case of Luton, you've got 100% ownership. You've got limited companies, as we've talked about in our History of podcast. These companies are not required to share their financial information in entirety, in detail, to the governing bodies. They got to disclose losses, yes, but they don't. They don't see the ins and outs of everyone's financial balance sheet.
Trust you to link this to American football. We don't want that type of system with trades, example, and stuff like that. Imagine the uproar if there was a football league club who just upped location after being somewhere for many years and just going somewhere else and started. Hold on.
Yeah, we'll move on from Wimbledon. But yeah, it's something that certainly you don't see NFL clubs on a whole going bust the way proper football clubs do. It's something that I think needs more work. However, I do think a club shouldn't be spending more than a proportion of its revenue on transfer fees and players' salaries. But I think that should be tied to the club. And I'm not saying that a club couldn't be bought out by a rich owner and then bankrolled to Premier League glory. I think that should still be allowed to happen, provided the income is coming in a way that's non-debt laden. And there are ways to do it. There definitely are ways and means of doing it. It just becomes, does everyone involved want it to happen? I think the EFL maybe have bungled this salary cap by not consulting the PFA, because I think the PFA are having to dip their hands in their pockets and play players that currently aren't being paid. I think it was Macclesfield that the PFA contributed towards players' wages and things like that. So it's in everyone's interest to come to some sort of agreement. What the PFA won't like, though, is a restriction on how much a player could earn. And when you look in League One, a player playing for Sunderland, when we're back to crowds in games, Sunderland have got 30,000 plus seat stadium, and they fill it more so than any other team in their league. They are going to have a bigger revenue. They're going to sell more shirts, because it's not just about a bum on a seat paying £30 for a ticket. They will then buy food at the game. They will buy more a programme, and then they'll buy a football shirt, and they'll probably go to more. It's a expanding cost and an expanding revenue stream by having more punters in the door. A team that has a stadium like, we'll take Wickham for example, holds 10,000. Every game, their revenue is a third of Sunderland's, and they're in different leagues, and that's how it should be a proportion of that club's revenue. However, what it then requires is the club to be accurate with its reporting, the EFL quick enough to then work out which clubs have breached it, and appropriate sanctions to be put in place for clubs that breached it are timely and not
like drag out till the end of the season.
Yeah, because then it makes a mockery of the whole situation. And then we're in a situation where, if you listen to our History of podcast, where we look at Bournemouth, you don't end up being promoted and then subsequently being able to negotiate your fine because you're actually in another league anyway. So interesting to see that one. I think there will be something in place before the beginning of the next season, because you think August 2020 was when this was agreed. I think they'll need to bring something in urgently, given the financial plight that some clubs are going to be in next season anyway. So that concludes our news for this week. Thank you all for watching. As always, if you like the podcast, do leave us a thumbs up. Leave us a comment down below if there's anything we've missed in the last couple of weeks. Also, if there's anything you want us to cover in greater detail going forward, we'd absolutely love to do that. The History of Bristol City is going up this weekend, where we look at actually, I've got their shirt on. When we look at Bristol City in more depth. Really fascinating to cover some clubs that I didn't know too much history about. So that was a really, really good podcast to.
That's actually all. That is actually all clubs in the Football League in Paul's case.
Hey, I know some things. But no, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. As always, if you want us to go through. If you want to listen to us go through in more detail the games that happened this week, head over to our main podcast, which will be on any podcast streaming service, and we'll break down the games game by game, and we look at who scored and the events from the weekends and midweek fixtures. So that's goodbye from me.
That's goodbye from me.
And we'll speak to you all next week. Goodbye.
Bye.